So this webinar will be recorded and shared with everyone that registered. And today, what we're going to do is a little bit different. We will not be using the Q&A feature or the chat for questions. The reason for that is because we actually had to pre-record Ashlea's presentation. She's actually on her way to New Zealand right now. So just as an FYI, I will put my email address in the chat. So if folks have questions, I can compile a list and I will send them to Ashlea. Now, if this is your first time here, just to let you know that you are automatically added to our email list group, so you'll be getting announcements for future presentations. We have them twice a month, the second and the fourth Friday of every month, unless it falls on a holiday. And then also at the end, there will be a little survey that pops up. If you could share your mana'o or your feedback, that would be great. That will give us some idea of what kind of topics we could talk about in the future. And if you don't have time and you have to run, we will follow up with an email on Monday to see if you can share your feedback then. And also, as a tip, you can also register even if you're not going to be attending with us in live, because you will get the recording. You can still watch it that way. So mahalo. So for those that are new, there's a lot of new folks that registered today, and just want to give you an idea about this webinar series. So this year's theme was Aloha Aku, Aloha Mai, which basically is reciprocity, goodwill, and the reason why we did that was because usually we have the majority of our speakers are Native Hawaiian speakers. But this year we wanted to include more Indigenous folks. So Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native. And so we just wanted to more reflect accurately the environment that we all live in together. We're not in a silo. So we are really lucky and fortunate today to have our first international speaker, which is Ashlea Gillon. And she'll be talking about body sovereignty, about fat shaming and how that impacts Indigenous women of color. And so what will happen is after the recording, I will put my email in the chat. We can have discussion as well. And then what she would like to do is have a follow-up webinar, mini webinar, addressing all the questions that she'll be receiving. So I'd just like to say welcome everybody, and we'll get started. All right, can folks see that? Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and hit play and let me know if you can hear the sound.
Tātou, ngā mihi nunui kia koutou, he uri au ngō ngā te awa ngā puhi me ngai te rangi, ko Ashlea tōku ingoa no Aotearoa Ahau. Kia ora, I'm Ash. I am a research fellow and doctoral student at the University of Auckland in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and a Fulbright scholar at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I have the privilege of talking stories today. So I will share my screen with so my doctoral research is about body sovereignty for fat Indigenous wahine and what that looks like within the racist, sexist, fat-phobic world we occupy, and particularly what that looks like within health spaces. So I'm just going to sort of talk a little bit about that. but I always like to position myself and who I am because we're relational people, right? So I am a daughter, a sister, a partner, a friend, a whanaunga, a relation. I am a fat Indigenous wahine working with other fat Indigenous wahine. And this is just something I always like to bring into the space because this all shapes who I am and how I see the world and how I understand the research I undertake. And I like to talk a little bit about our creation story from Te Ao Māori, a little bit about Papa Tuanuku, our Earth Mother, and Ranginui, our Sky Father, and about how Papa Tuanuku is the first wahine body and the different ways in which we come from her. And they were in a tight embrace originally, and their children were in between them, all the different atua. And one day, the Tāne Mahuta, atua of the forests, wanted more space, more light, and separated Papa and Rangi and brought into world Te Ao Marama, the world of light, the world of life and being. So I always think it's really important to understand where we come from and how we see the world. And for Māori, this is the correct way of Aotearoa New Zealand on a map. So we see the North Island or Te Ika a Maui as a fish, and the top of that fish is Te Whanganui-a-Tara, which is Wellington, and the bottom of the fish is the tip of the island. So we see it this way. So I always like to bring in our worldview into anything I talk about. And what is Māori? I keep using this kupu, I keep using this word, but Māori is ordinary. Māori is normal. Māori is the name of the Indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And this name came into being in relation to the colonial settlers that arrived in Aotearoa. So before they were there, we were known by our hapu or our sub-tribes and our ʻiwi rather than a collective identity or ethnicity. So to be Māori is to be normal, to be native, to be Indigenous, to be without restraint, and to be the Indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so I talk a lot about that stuff. And as with a lot of Indigenous peoples, our language is very rich and it has a lot of insight into how we understood the world pre-colonization and how we can still understand the world. And so our kupu Mōmona, or our words for fatness, also have a lot of insight into how we thought about fatness and the other things we considered. So our word for Mōmona, which I know is similar in Hawaii, you know, means fat and richness, fertile, nourished. Mātu is another word we have for fat, which means richness and substance. Tuawhiti, thick, fleshy, succulent, of good quality, of substance. Ngāko, fat, essence, the substance, means to be forever ingrained or unrestricted. So we really conceptualize fatness in a very different way from the westernized world. When we think about Mōmona, we think about Aina Mōmona, you know, we think about Moana Mōmona, we think about all these different ways that Mōmona is ingrained in our lives in relation to the whenua or the Aina and the Moana, right? But we don't often talk about that in-depth way of conceptualizing Mōmona in relation to our bodies. And so to whakamōmona something is to enrich it, to make it fat, to embellish it, to make it fertile, to fertilize. And I think this is a really important concept that we should really consider in relation to health and wellness in our bodies. And so what is a body? We have one of the main words we use for body is tinana, which means real, actual. It's the trunk of the tree, a main part, the center of things, as well as the self, a person or reality. And so it's really important to consider how the body is a really important place where all these different interactions occur and all these different meanings are constructed. And the impact that colonization has had on our bodies and the ways that we understand our bodies and their changes and their functions. And so we know that a lot of value is inscribed and placed upon us based on how our bodies look, how our bodies change, our body sizes, and just really how we move about in the world. And so there's really a lot of this imposition on us, particularly when we think about our relationship with bodies. And I'm not just talking about our physical bodies, when we think about the relationship with land, with water, with people, right? We can see a lot of really really taumaha, really heavy examples happening right now in the world when we see what's happening with the way that, I guess, our colonial governments and our settler governments engage with our land, right? They aren't engaging with it from an understanding that it's a body and that we're in relation with it. So it's really important to understand that we had these different ways of thinking, and we still do have these ways of thinking, but there's a lot of colonial imposition upon us. And so we have marae. This is my marae in Te Teko, also known as Texas, the center of the world in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's about a 4-hour drive from Auckland, which is the city you fly into. This is Tūtau, and in the background is my maunga, Putuaki. And so our marae, our ancestral dwellings, really are bodies. They're bodies of knowledge, of history, of our whakapapa, our genealogy, and they really are bodies that house and nourish people. And so this is an example of a wharenui, which is a big, fat meeting house. Sometimes a wharenui can be depicted as an ancestor, a whare tipuna. And so we can see here the parts of the body. You can see the arms with the fingers on the front of the house. Inside the house, we have the ribs, we have the backbone, we have all these different parts that illustrate a body. And particularly when this body relates to a wahine ancestor, we can think about the inside of a wharenui as a space for conceiving and producing new ideas. This is where you might have a pōwhiri or a welcome ceremony where people kōrero to each other, where they talk story to each other and where you develop relationships, right? So really thinking about, we thought very broadly about bodies. We also thought broadly about the ways in which we engage in restriction and protection, right? So for us, we have a word arahui, which is different from lahui. And arahui is really about enacting our rights as kaitiaki, as guardians, and about enacting our agency and authority to look after a space, to malama a space, to prevent, to restore, to protect. So it's a ritual that is not only physical but spiritual, and it's a means of rebalancing through relationality, through that relationship we have with a space. So often you'll see rahui in places such as our forests. We had a big rahui placed upon one of our forests in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, because there was a disease killing our kauri trees, which are one of our native ancestral trees. We have rahui around collecting shellfish and seafood in certain areas where they need to be replenished. And we just have rahui in places that need a little bit of Mōmona, a little bit of looking after and nourishing. And so, you know, the word itself, hui, to bundle, to cluster, to gather. Ara is a day or a period of time. And so it's a period of time in which an area is protected and left alone in order for abundance to prosper, in order for fatness to increase, and where the bodies of whenua, moana, of kai, of people within that space can replenish and gather and restore. So it's a very different way of thinking about restriction than that from the westernized world, right? So we think of restriction in this way about nourishment. It's about reciprocating that nourishment that those spaces give to us. And so in reclaiming a lot of these understandings of restriction, which are often appropriated by colonization, by the ways that we're taught to understand these different bodies, we're able to challenge this idea that restriction and kind of subordination are synonymous. So challenge the idea that restriction is always about yielding or giving into these kind of narratives, when actually it's about nourishment, it's about Mōmona. And so I know we have the same kind of concept as mana. One of the issues we have is that our mana, our kind of authority, autonomy, our sovereignty, our self-determination, all of those things over ourselves, our lands, our bodies, it's just continuously disregarded. It's devalued and it's not acknowledged by those in power. And we see that through policy, we see that through the systems that structure our access. And we see that a lot, right? Matua Moana Jackson, he talked a lot about how we never ceded sovereignty, it's that our sovereignty is continuously disregarded. And so we have this real issue, this real raru with the concept of ownership, because from a Māori perspective, ownership is quite a contested concept because we didn't have it in the same way that the Western world did. So it really enforces the idea that properties, people are all commodified and can be possessed in that way. Whereas from a Māori perspective, we have a role of kaitiakitanga, of guardianship, responsibility, and of sovereignty and self-determination over our bodies and over the different bodies that we relate with, right? We have a responsibility to reciprocate that mōmonatanga. And so it really doesn't align really nicely with our concepts. And so again, the issue is that our authority, agency, and autonomy are not really recognized in these spaces. And I think a really good example of that is how we might have whenua or aina or moana that we don't touch, that we acknowledge is not our space, but we look after it. And yet the westernized world sees that as an opportunity to utilize that space, to build on that space, to do stuff that's not appropriate in that space, because they don't understand the way that we relate in those spaces. And so what is body sovereignty? I keep talking about this. What am I meaning when I talk about this? So there's a lot of layers to body sovereignty. Our bodies are really policed. We're over and under surveilled. We can be invisibilized and hypervisibilized. We can be desexualized. And again, coming back to that idea of ownership as well, is that there's this public ownership that goes on around bodies and around particularly wahine bodies, indigenous bodies, bodies that are minoritized, right? And we're often represented, we're reframed, we're reclassified in all these ways that diminish us. We're classified in these ways as unwell or diseased. And then that impacts our access, and that's our access to healthcare treatments and options, to having accurate representations of our bodies in places that are really important, and our access to equitable opportunities and socioeconomic determinants of health as well. And so when we think about body sovereignty in terms of health, it's really located in a lot of the talk around wahine bodies and the ability to have jurisdiction over our bodies. And if we think about the different spaces, in particular in reproductive rights, the concept of body sovereignty fits really importantly and really nicely in these other conversations around autonomy and health. And so in terms of fatness, my fatness should not restrict my access to healthcare, to treatment options, to having a non-biased exploration into any issues I might have, and a non-fat focused consultation. And so a lot of the messaging is very clear to us as fat patients, as fat people using health spaces, is that we don't fit in any realm in that space. And so it really is quite enforced, the denial of our access. It's either you lose weight or you lose access to jobs, to mortgages, to housing, to healthcare, to fertility access, to surgeries, medications, to immigration and visas, to clothing, to education. So there's all these different areas in which the medicalization of fatness is weaponized against us having access to our human rights. And so what can you tell about looking at a fat person? At a person with a fat body? You can tell how you feel about fat people. That's all you can tell. You can't tell how much we eat, how much we move, how much we care about ourselves, what our health status looks like, what kind of person we are, what our character is like, what our ethics and morals are like. And you also can't tell that what our worth is as a really complex human being, as a relational human being. So I think this is a really important question to sit with, because how you react to a fat body, how you interpret a fat body really says a lot about what you've been taught about fat people and how you feel about fat people. And so why is this important? Fat bias and fat stigma actually can cause a lot of health issues. In terms of the physiology, you can get increased cortisol, you can get increased blood pressure, inflammatory markers, insulin resistance, diabetes, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. And then fat bias can also lead to mental health issues, the inability to gain a non-discriminatory healthcare experience, and it can lead to weight gain as well. And so a lot of people, I can hear them say, they're like, well, what about health, right? The thing is, health behaviors and health seeking is positioned as this moral hierarchy, right? If you're engaging in health behaviors, that means you're a good, productive, able-bodied person, and therefore you're a person of substance. That's what healthism has positioned, the individual pursuit for health as this moral hierarchy. And it kind of really fails to recognize the complex relationship that this state has with actually providing access to healthcare for us. It kind of absolves the state of responsibility because it's a you problem. But also, a person's health status should not dictate whether or not they have access to their human rights, right? It doesn't matter how unhealthy we might be, we still deserve access to housing, to clothing, to healthcare, to people to treat us like human beings. And that's kind of where the issue lies, because a lot of this fat bias is used to weaponize that access against us and to deny us that until we conform into this morally good person who's engaging in these behaviors that may or may not be good for us. And so for some people, no matter how many kind of health behaviors we engage in, we're still classified as unhealthy. And that's because health is based on a lot more than just our fatness or what we eat. And that's why it's really important for us to kind of stop moralizing health status and to really think about the fact that everyone deserves the opportunity to access whatever they need, because they are a human being, because we are Indigenous peoples, because we are relational peoples. We should be able to live our lives in this way that doesn't deny us access based on these systems of oppression that we're forced to participate in. And so I do love Matua Moana Jackson, and I think he really nails it when he talks about decolonization and restoration and why it's so important for us to engage in this space. And so he says that decolonization may not be the most appropriate word for that kind of remedy, because like colonization, it came from somewhere else. Perhaps it could be replaced with the ethic of restoration. The use of this term would seek to replace colonization not by merely deconstructing or culturally sensitizing the attitudes and power structures that it has established, but by restoring a kaua that allows for balanced relationships based on the need for ʻiwi and hapu, independence upon which any meaningful interdependence must rest. Restoration, like colonization, is a process, not an event, and it will require a change of mind and heart as much as a change of structure. And I think he really nails it when he talks about restoration in that way, right? To whakamōmona something is really important. And so if we can really whakamōmona our ways of being and knowing, we can work towards restoration and moving through these different colonial grievances that we have. And so what can you do? Do you follow fat people? Are you friends with fat people on social media? Do you follow fat people of color or fat wahine? Do you listen to marginalized voices in these spaces? And do you accept marginalized people's experiences as true? Right? So often we see that certain peoples can't conceptualize our experiences of oppression because they can't relate. We see that a lot with racism, for sure. We see that a lot in the fat space as well. Do you amplify these voices? Do you see bodies that look different from you, and do you follow those people? You know, there's different ways that we can engage in this space to start unlearning what colonization has taught us. We can take IATs, we can take bias tests and see where we have biases and where we can work to deconstruct those. We can ask for consent if we need to discuss weight. We can ask for consent if we need to discuss food. We can let people know why we need to take their weight, if we do need to take their weight, and ask them if they want to know the number on a scale, if they must be weighed. Providing comprehensive health plans that don't focus on weight loss. We can ask our clinics, our workspaces, wherever we might be, for inclusive equipment purchases if there isn't safe equipment for fat people. How many of our offices have chairs that only have arms, right, where people can't fit, or chairs that only take lower weights? A lot of healthcare spaces don't have gowns, blood pressure cuffs, beds that take higher weights. So, it's creating this inaccessible environment for people. Do you talk to fat people? Do you include fat people? Are you friends with fat people, right? Think about that critically. Think about your friend group. Think about the different people in that space. And are you friends with people who have different bodies from you? And be mindful how you speak about fat bodies, about food, diet, and exercise. A lot of these thoughts, do they come from a colonial mindset? And how do we speak about those? Because, children as young as 2 and 3 pick up our biases when we talk in this way. And that's not a safe space for our keiki, not a safe space for our tamariki. Be critically self-reflective and work on your biases and unlearning. It's an ongoing journey. Like Mōmona Jackson said, it's not a destination, it's a journey. And question what you're taught about fatness. Question what you're taught about bodies. Question what is being presented to us consistently through the media, through society, through the different westernized biomedical health spaces, right? And ask the questions. Kia ora mai tātou. And that is my kōrero. I will stop share.
Mahalo. A lot of amazing thoughts there. I do have questions.
Yeah, go for it.
So my first question is, I think about those that are in position of influence, such as celebrities, well-known. And while you were talking, the first ones that came to my mind were Lizzo. And me growing up, I don't know, this is going to age me, but Fat Albert, right? And for Hawaiians, the most legendary musician, Israel Kamaka Viva Ole, right? So I guess, I can only imagine as a day-to-day lay person having to navigate just being themselves to actually get to that point where Lizzo became famous because of her talent, Israel became famous because of his talent, and then Fat Albert was a cartoon, right? So how do we, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Is like, how do we get to that point, right? Where we see beyond it, right? But then when it comes to when we're on the street with someone, then the judgment comes through, right? So if you're not famous like Lizzo or Israel or Fat Albert, like I don't know, you can comment. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think you raise a great point, right? Like if we even just think about our media, right? And the things that we're presented regularly, it's not often we're presented fat people, right? You came up with 3 that, you could think of off the top of your head, right? So that in itself is an example of our fat bias system, because we don't place fat people regularly in these public spaces. And when we do, it's as a joke, it's in a quest to lose weight. It's not really recognizing their talent. So I think Lizzo and Israel are really good examples of that. And we see with Lizzo, she has a compounded experience because she is fat, she is Black, and she is a woman. So she experiences these different systems of oppression at the same time and gets so much abuse for it, And so I think we really need to challenge these ideas and sit with those thoughts. When we do have those judgments, why are we having those? Where did that come from? And how can I do better next time? And that's one of the reasons why taking the bias tests are really good for us, because they can show us where our biases are, and then they can show us places that we can kind of work on those. But it's such a thing in the media that there's just not the representation, and the representation is really important because it then normalizes different bodies, because we've always had a variety of bodies throughout our histories, but we're so often taught that that's not the case.
Right. And I was thinking about, which was like, you had a lot of eye-opening comments or statements in there. And one of the things I thought about was, you said ownership of body, right? So for some reason, when it comes to fat people, people either want to fix them and put them on a weight loss program, or they're just like, you have no motivation, I'm not going to help you, and discard you. Like there's no in between, right? And so I feel like there's definitely a learned behavior from all this, and for you to articulate it in such a cultural way is just even more like appalling, right? And that's just coming from me. You know, and then there's the other point of, I also think about self-deprecating, right? And that's also learned. And how do we, in their mind, it's okay, but how do we be like, you know, that's kind of like also part of the whole institutionalization of this mindset. And what would your advice be for that?
No, I definitely, and that's such a thing, because you know, it's either you're the good fat person because you'll let me help you, because we've now kind of put you under this hyper surveillance, we've infantile you as well, right? Or you're a bad fat person, I don't want anything to do with you, you're not willing to let me fix you. And so it's really interesting the way that certain bodies become up for public scrutiny and ownership in that way. When you were talking, I was thinking about like Pitch Perfect and Fat Amy. And you know, she says it really well in the movie. You know, people like, you call yourself Fat Amy, and she's like, well, yeah, I don't want you thin bitches to do it, right? Because if we do it first in that negative way, then they can't weaponize it against us. Whereas a lot of kind of the fat liberation movement is about recognizing that the word fat has been assigned these connotations for years from a westernized culture, but we understood it as far more positive than negative, right? Like if we look at our indigenous words for fatness, we see that we had multiple meanings, and that fat is a descriptor. It's a factual description of certain bodies. And so I think a lot of the way that fat bias works in our society is that if fat people can be funny and take ownership of it, then it can't be weaponized against us in that same way that it has been for so long. And so it's really about challenging the way that we use the word, first of all, and the way that we talk about fatness, and creating these safer spaces for people who are in fatter bodies to participate in ways that aren't, you know, under scrutiny in the same way. Because it's our experiences are very much shaped by how people treat us, and then ultimately how people deny us access in those spaces, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, it's a love yourself thing, but it's like, I can love myself all I want. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to buy clothes. It doesn't mean a doctor's going to listen to me and run a test. It doesn't mean I'm going to get the prescription I need. It doesn't mean I'm going to get a job. Me loving myself, that's great. Like, we all should love ourselves, but we all should also make society more accessible for those at the margins.
Yeah, I agree with you. I can't think of any other questions, but I do want to, and if I do, I'll email you. But I just want to really mahalo you for this last minute getting together and talking story and doing your presentation. And so hopefully we'll stay connected, and I will send you the recording when it's all pow. So mahalo nui.
Oh, thank you so much. Kia ora.
So that was interesting. Any thoughts or comments? And I'm going to actually work with her to see when we can get together again. And since we have everyone's email addresses, we'll let you guys know that she'll be available again to answer any questions. But we can definitely have a discussion. Al Perez says, Lizzo put her weight in the forefront to disarm critics, making room for her talent to shine through. Anella says, I appreciate how she uses the word fat. The use of the word fat makes me personally cringe and feel bad calling someone fat. However, by normalizing the word, you take the power negative away from the word. And then it just takes educating and asking questions, definitely. So yeah, that was a great conversation with her. So I would like to let you guys know that the next webinar is going to be on there's not going to be one on January 23rd because it is so close to the holiday. The next one will be on January 13th, and that will be featuring Dr. Momi Ka'anoi, my sister-in-law, and Dr. Neil Palafox, and what it was like for their journey to becoming a doctor, becoming doctors and their leadership roles. And so if you're interested in that, we'll send out an email announcing that, and so you can register for that as well. So I just want to mahalo everyone, the new folks that came and joined us today, and that will also join us during the recording. Also like to return all the regulars that have come back to watch today. And so this is going to be kind of our pilot test to see how pre-recorded webinars will work, if we will continue to do this, or how we will answer your questions in the future. So your comments would be greatly appreciated to figure out how we do this next. Because of Dr. Momi and Dr. Neil's availability, I may have to also record theirs. But anyway, so since we won't be seeing you until the next year, happy holidays, everybody, for whatever you celebrate. I hope you all safe gatherings, and malama pono, aloha ke kahi, and we'll keep in touch. So ahuiho.